Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a really critical global security issue, Iran's nuclear program. And consider this staggering fact from recent reports. Iran could now potentially produce enough weapons-grade uranium for its first nuclear weapon in as little as 2 to 3 days. Just think about that. 2 to 3 days. That astonishing speed. It's just one of the crucial facts we really need to unpack today. Our mission here is to cut through some of the noise, give you a comprehensive understanding of what's actually happening with Iran's nuclear activities. We'll be looking closely at the latest findings from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, particularly their May 2025 report, and we'll try to connect the dots between those technical details, the history, and of course the wider geopolitical implications.
Exactly. And what's crucial here is how the IAEA, in its very precise, sometimes understated way, provides these data points. But when you put them together, they paint a very clear picture. And frankly, it's a very concerning picture for global stability. So we're drawing from those recent IAEA reports, yes, but also historical analyses, expert commentary on things like the JCPOA agreement. And we'll even touch on the science of heavy water to give you the full context.
Okay, let's get right into it then. This latest IAEA report from May 2025, it flags some, well, truly significant developments. Alarming, really. The numbers themselves are pretty striking.
They really are. What stands out immediately is just the sheer scale and the speed of Iran's enrichment activities. So as of May 17th, 2025, Iran's stockpile of 60% highly enriched uranium, that's HEU, in its hexafluoride gas form, well, it hit 408.6 kilograms of uranium mass.
400 kilograms. That sounds like a lot. How much is that, really?
Well, think of it as roughly the weight of a compact car engine. Or if you're talking the gas form, the hex mass, it's over 600 kilograms. And crucially, that's a net increase of almost 134 kilograms just since the last report. A big jump.
Wow, okay. That is a big jump. And what does having that much 60% enriched uranium actually mean? I mean, in terms of potential weapons capability?
Right. So this 60% HEU, it's not quite weapons grade yet, but it's very close. It can be converted into enough weapon grade uranium, or WGU, that's usually around 90% enrichment for about 9 nuclear weapons. Each weapon typically needs around 25 kilograms of WGU.
9 weapons worth. And how fast could they make that conversion?
This is the really startling part. The conversion could happen in just 3 weeks at their Fordo fuel enrichment plant.
3 weeks?
And even more critically, they could produce the first 25 kilograms of WGU needed for one weapon. Well, at Fordo, they could do that in as little as 2 to 3 days.
2 to 3 days for the first one. That's an incredibly short breakout time. What if they decide to use more than just Fordo?
Exactly. If Iran were to, say, initiate a breakout using both Fordo and their other main site, the Natanz fuel enrichment plant, well, calculations suggest the two combined could produce enough WGU for 11 nuclear weapons in the first month alone.
11 in a month.
Yeah, and that capacity ramps up quickly. You could be 15 weapons by the end of the second month, 19 by the end of the third, 21 by the fourth, and 22 by the fifth month. So you see, it's not just about getting one bomb. It demonstrates a clear capability for rapid expansion towards a larger arsenal if they chose to go that route.
Okay, but is there any plausible civilian reason for producing uranium enriched to 60%? Especially in these quantities, hundreds of kilograms.
Look, the IAEA report is very direct on this. It explicitly states Iran has no credible civilian use or justification for producing 60% enriched uranium, certainly not at this scale. The agency's conclusion is pretty stark. Iran's real intent seems to be preparedness. Preparedness to produce large quantities of WGU quickly if a decision is made. And the IAEA, in its careful language, reiterated its serious concern about this. They pointed out Iran is the only non-nuclear weapon state producing uranium enriched to this level. Action speaking louder than words, perhaps.
So they're building this stockpile rapidly. You mentioned the increase. Can they keep producing at this rate? Is it sustainable?
That's a good question. The current production rate for the 60% HEU is about 37.5 kilograms of uranium mass per month. They're using a mix of feedstock, some 20% enriched uranium at Fordo, and some 5% low-enriched uranium, or LEU, at their pilot fuel enrichment plant. Now, at that rate, they could theoretically produce around 456 kilograms of this near 60% stuff per year. However, and this is important, this high rate isn't sustainable long-term with their current feed strategy. They're burning through their existing stockpile of 20% enriched uranium much faster than they're making it. Yeah, they're using about 117 kilograms of 20% feed per month, but only producing 14 kilograms. So their 20% stock has dropped quite a bit. The estimate is this high rate for 60% HEU can only be sustained for about another 3 months after that May report date. It's like a sprint.
A sprint, but still 3 months is a significant window, isn't it?
It absolutely is a critical window.
And what about the bigger picture, their total enriched uranium stockpile, all levels, and the centrifuges themselves? Are they adding more machines?
Right, the overall picture shows growth, too. The total net stock of enriched uranium across all enrichment levels went up by over 950 kilograms. It now stands at roughly 9,247 kilograms of uranium mass as of May 17th. That's a huge amount of material overall.
9 tons?
Pretty much. And yes, they're definitely expanding their centrifuge infrastructure. Iran now has nearly 14,700 advanced centrifuges installed at Natanz and Fordo. If you add in the older IR ones, the total number installed is roughly 21,900, and about 18,000 of those are actively enriching uranium right now.
And using more advanced models means faster enrichment, right?
Exactly. They recently installed 5 new cascades of their more advanced IR4 centrifuges at Natanz, bringing the total operating IR4 cascades there to 12. So yeah, they're not just enriching more material, they're upgrading the machinery to enrich it faster and more efficiently.
Okay, these numbers certainly paint a grim picture of Iran's capabilities. But this brings us to another crucial question, maybe even more unsettling. How much do we really know? How much visibility does the IAEA, does the world actually have into Iran's program right now? Can we trust these figures completely if monitoring is difficult?
That's a central problem. The IAEA's ability to effectively monitor Iran's program has been, well, severely hampered. Remember last fall, Iran decided to withdraw the designation of several very experienced IAEA inspectors.
Yes, I do remember that.
Well, it seriously affects the agency's verification work. It's not just about having fewer inspectors, it's about losing people with deep knowledge of the facilities and the program's history. The IAEA has asked Iran to reconsider repeatedly. There was even a censure resolution from the Board of Governors in June 2024 about it, but Iran hasn't budged. The agency stated very clearly this was not in line with the required spirit of cooperation.
So less experienced people, fewer of them.
Yeah.
What does that mean for tracking everything, especially when things are moving so fast, like with these new centrifuges?
It leads to critical gaps. The IAEA itself has stated it has lost continuity of knowledge, that's their phrase, regarding the production and current inventory of key items. Things like centrifuges, the rotors and bellows, which are crucial components, heavy water, and even uranium or concentrate, the very starting material.
Lost continuity, meaning they can't be sure how much exists or where it all came from?
Precisely. And they added that it will not be possible to restore that lost knowledge. It's like trying to reconstruct a movie when you've missed crucial scenes. You just can't be certain about the full picture.
Right.
And remember, Iran also removed all the IAEA equipment related to JCPOA's surveillance and monitoring back in February 2021. Cameras, seals, online enrichment monitors, gone. The IAEA says this has had detrimental implications for the agency's ability to provide assurance of the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program.
It really feels like they've systematically dismantled the oversight mechanisms, and they're still not implementing the additional protocol either. That was supposed to give broader inspection access.
That's correct. Iran stopped implementing the additional protocol, the AP, along with other JCPOA monitoring measures, on February 23, 2021. Without the AP, the IAEA can't conduct what's called complementary access, basically, short notice inspections at sites beyond the declared ones, nor do they receive updated declarations from Iran about their nuclear material and activities.
So significant blind spots seem deliberately created.
It certainly appears that way, and when you connect this lack of transparency to their technical actions, like focusing so heavily on 60% enrichment instead of, say, stockpiling low-enriched uranium for actual power reactors, well, it directly contradicts their stated peaceful intentions. The pattern of behavior suggests something else might be the priority.
Okay, so that covers the uranium enrichment path pretty thoroughly. But you mentioned earlier there's another potential route to a nuclear weapon, plutonium. And that brings us to this term we hear sometimes, heavy water. For those of us listening who aren't nuclear physicists, what exactly is heavy water and why is it relevant here?
Yeah, let's broaden the scope a bit. Understanding heavy water is important because it reveals these different potential paths a nuclear program can take. Simply put, heavy water is water where the usual hydrogen atoms, which have just a proton, are replaced by deuterium atoms. Deuterium is hydrogen with an extra neutron.
So it's heavier.
Yep, about 5 to 10% heavier than regular water, hence the name. Fun facts. It apparently tastes slightly sweet and it freezes a bit warmer, around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius instead of 0.
Can you drink it?
Small amounts are safe, yeah.
Yeah.
But large quantities, say, if over half the water in your body became heavy water, it could disrupt your metabolism and actually be lethal. The chemical bonds involving deuterium are stronger.
Okay, interesting. But the nuclear connection.
Right. In nuclear reactors, heavy water acts as a very effective neutron moderator. It slows down the fast neutrons produced by fission without absorbing too many of them. This makes further fission reactions more likely. And the key thing is, this efficiency allows some reactor designs to use unenriched natural uranium, which is only about 0.72% fissile U-235, to sustain a chain reaction.
Unlike typical reactors that need enriched uranium.
Exactly. Most common light water reactors need uranium enriched to about 3 to 5% U-235. So using heavy water means you don't necessarily need a huge enrichment infrastructure for the fuel itself. And importantly, this property makes heavy water particularly suitable for certain types of reactors, including breeder reactors, which are very efficient at producing weapons-grade plutonium as a byproduct of their operation.
And Iran has a heavy water reactor, doesn't it? The Arak facility. That's been in the news recently, too.
Yes, exactly. The Arak heavy water reactor, sometimes called KHRR or IR-20, its design inherently produces plutonium during operation. This offers Iran a potential second pathway to a nuclear bomb, completely separate from their highly enriched uranium program.
Wasn't that reactor supposed to be modified under the JCPOA deal?
It was. A key part of the 2015 deal was that Iran agreed to redesign the Arak reactor core to drastically limit its plutonium production capability. Britain was actually helping with that redesign after the U.S. left the deal. Iran did start testing the reactor's secondary cooling circuit back in 2019, which wasn't technically a violation at the time. But things have changed.
Changed how? You mean the recent attack?
Precisely. On June 19, 2025, just recently, reports emerged that Israel attacked the Arak heavy water facility, along with other sites. Iranian state television quickly reported no radiation danger whatsoever and said the facility had been evacuated beforehand.
What about IAEA monitoring at Arak now, given everything we've discussed about transparency issues?
Well, IAEA inspectors did visit Arak back on May 14, 2025. But just like with the centrifuges and other materials, the restrictions Iran has placed on inspectors mean the IAEA says it has lost continuity of knowledge about Iran's heavy water production and inventories. This seriously impacts their ability to verify that all heavy water activities are purely peaceful. It's another significant blind spot.
So, multiple pathways, reduced visibility. Let's also touch on the Bushehr nuclear power plant. That's Iran's only operating commercial power reactor, right? What's its role?
Yes, Bushehr is the only one currently generating electricity. It was built by Russia, is operated with Russian assistance, and Russia supplies all the nuclear fuel for it. It's been feeding power to Iran's grid since around 2010.
Some experts have questioned why Iran, with all its oil and gas, would even need nuclear power like Bushehr.
That's true. Analysts like Richard Nephew and John Erath, for instance, have raised that point. They question the economic rationale for an oil-rich nation building such an expensive plant. Their suggestion is that, while Bushehr itself doesn't directly contribute to a weapons program, Russia maintains tight control over the fuel, supplying it and taking back the spent fuel, which contains plutonium. The project might serve other purposes, like gaining technical expertise, experience in managing complex nuclear projects, handling nuclear materials, and maybe building international legitimacy as a nuclear-capable state, even if just for power. It's about the broader ecosystem.
And Bushehr also came up in recent warnings, didn't it? Especially after the Arak strike.
Absolutely. The situation got very tense. On June 20th, 2025, the day after the Arak strike reports, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi issued a stark warning to the UN Security Council. He warned that if Bushehr were to be struck, a direct hit on the reactor could cause a very high release of radioactivity.
Wow. What would that mean?
He mentioned potential consequences, like civilians needing to take iodine tablets to protect their thyroids, and serious disruptions to food supplies due to contamination. A major radiological emergency.
And Russia reacted, too. They have people working there.
Yes, on June 19th, Russia announced it had reached an agreement with Israel regarding the safety of the more than 200 Russian specialists working at Bushehr. And Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear energy corporation, confirmed it had evacuated tens of its employees from the site as a precaution. It really highlights the risks when conflict nears these facilities.
It's definitely worth reminding ourselves, though, as the World Nuclear Association often points out, that commercial nuclear power itself has a strong safety record overall.
That's a fair point. Generally speaking, yes. There have only been 2 truly major reactor accidents with significant off-site releases, Chernobyl and Fukushima, in literally thousands of reactor years of operation worldwide.
And commercial power reactors like Bushehr, because they use low-enriched uranium fuel, simply cannot explode like a nuclear bomb. The physics are different.
Correct. The danger isn't a nuclear explosion. But, as Director Grossi warned, a conventional attack or a severe accident that leads to a core meltdown and a breach of the containment structure can release large amounts of radioactivity into the environment. We saw at Fukushima that this can cause widespread contamination, long-term economic disruption, and force large-scale evacuations, even if the immediate death toll from radiation is low. Modern plans have multiple safety layers, but a deliberate military strike is a scenario they might not be designed to withstand fully.
Okay, so bringing this all together, what is this escalating situation, these technical advancements, the reduced transparency, the recent attacks? What does it all mean when we look back at past efforts to control Iran's program, specifically the JCPOA, the nuclear deal?
Well, it starkly illustrates just how fragile these kinds of international agreements can be, especially when trust breaks down and compliance falters on either side. Remember, the JCPOA, signed back in 2015 by Iran and the P5+1 group, China, France, Germany, Russia, the UK, the US, plus the EU, was specifically designed to put verifiable limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. And under that deal, Iran explicitly reaffirmed it would never seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. That was a core commitment.
But looking at the details you've outlined, it seems Iran has now systematically broken basically all the key technical limits set by that deal.
That's essentially correct. Let's tick through some major ones. Uranium enrichment was capped at just 3.67%.
Now they're at 60%.
Right. The stockpile of that low-enriched uranium was limited to 300 kilograms.
Now they have over 400 kilos of 60% HEU alone and over 9,000 kilos total.
Exactly. There were strict limits on centrifuge R&D and manufacturing. They were supposed to phase out the old IR-1s over 10 years and only do limited research on newer models.
Now they're installing and running thousands of advanced IR-2-meter, IR-4, IR-6 centrifuges.
Correct, again. The Arak reactor was meant to be redesigned to prevent plutonium production. That redesign is incomplete, and the site was just attacked.
And the enhanced monitoring, the additional protocol.
Abandoned. All those core pillars of the JCPOA's verification regime are either gone or severely compromised.
And much of this unraveling seems traceable back to the U.S. decision to leave the deal in 2018.
That was certainly the catalyst. When the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in May 2018 and reimposed very tough sanctions, particularly on Iran's oil and banking sectors, well, Iran didn't immediately breach the deal. But over the following year, they began to gradually exceed the limits, step by step, resuming 20% enrichment, then 60%, building up stockpiles, restricting IAEA access. Their argument was essentially, if you're not holding up your end of the bargain, sanctions relief, why should we hold up ours? Nuclear limits.
It creates this escalatory cycle. And this current dynamic with direct strikes on nuclear facilities, it also has some disturbing historical echoes in the region, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The most prominent example is probably Operation Opera in 1981.
That was the Israeli strike on Iraq's reactor.
Yes. Israel launched a surprise airstrike that destroyed Iraq's Arak nuclear reactor near Baghdad. Iraq was also suspected of pursuing nuclear weapons at the time. Israel argued the strike was essential preemptive self-defense to prevent Saddam Hussein from getting the bomb. This established a kind of precedent, or at least a demonstrated willingness, for preemptive action against perceived nuclear threats in the region.
So the recent strikes on Iranian sites like Arak, they fit into that historical pattern, that doctrine.
They can be seen in that context, yes. Occurring amidst these already high regional tensions, they mirror that historical precedent and, as we've heard, raise those international warnings about the potential for a much wider, potentially catastrophic conflict involving nuclear sites. History might not repeat exactly, but the patterns can be worryingly familiar.
Well, this deep dive has certainly revealed a situation that's evolving incredibly fast and is, frankly, deeply concerning. Iran's nuclear program is clearly pushing far beyond agreed limits. And at the same time, international oversight, our ability to actually know what's happening, is being increasingly challenged. The facts really do speak for themselves here, highlighting a critical moment.
Absolutely. The numbers, the technical advancements, the sheer speed of potential breakout capability, they're undeniable. When you combine Iran's current trajectory with the serious limitations on transparency and the volatile regional situation, it presents an incredibly complex and urgent challenge for global security. That persistent gap between Iran's stated peaceful civilian goals and its actual activities, especially producing so much 60% enriched uranium with no clear need, remains a fundamental point of contention, and it seems to be widening.
So as we wrap up, here's something for you, the listener, to consider. If the international community keeps facing these significant hurdles in verifying the peaceful nature of Iran's program, and if Iran continues down this path of enrichment and expansion, what new strategies, what different approaches might be needed to prevent nuclear proliferation and try to ensure some measure of stability in that region in the years ahead? What does the next chapter look like?